In this video, we are going to discuss about variables. So, what is a variable? I want you to understand this variable in a simple form. A variable is a way of naming and storing a value. So, what do I mean by that? I'm going to explain it with this illustration for you to understand what variable is all about. Let's say, for example, you have 3 items. You have your sugar, you have your shoe, you have a stone. These 3 items, you want to store it in a container for a later use. So in order to store these 3 items, you need to create a container, a box that will contain that 3 items. So that box that you created is known as what? Variable. And in order to use that item that you store, you have to give those box a name. You have to give those box a name so that you can be able to go back there and pick the items that you store in it. So naming those box is what makes it a variable. So if you want to store your sugar in a box, you have to give it a name so that whenever you want to use it, if you want to use the item, you go back there so that that name that you gave to the box will help you to identify the item, the piece of information that you store in it. So if you do not name it, you won't be able to remember the type of information you store in it. So creating a box and naming it is what we call variables. Now I give you an example. Let's say after creating those boxes to store those items, you will name the first box box 1, name the second box box 2, name the third box box 3. In box 1, you store your sugar. In box 2, you store your shoe. In box 3, you store your stone. These 3 items. Whenever you want to pick those items, you can only remember the type of information that is in that box with their name. So whenever you say box 1, that means that box 1 is representing the sugar. If you say box 2 is representing the shoe. And if you say box 3 is representing the stone. So whenever you call those names by the boxes, it will represent what is being stored there. That is what variables is all about. And we have 2 types of variables. We have local variables and global variables. So what are local variables? Local variables are those variables that is declared inside a function or block of code. And this local variable, we cannot use it outside its function. It can be only used within its function that is declared. So for example, if we declare a variable inside setup function, it can only be used within that setup function and cannot be used outside the setup function. Now look at this code here. This is a variable. I declare a variable to store this piece of information here. So this variable that I declare under this void loop is known as local variable. And I can only use this variable within this loop or any function that I created. I cannot use this variable in setup function. It can only be used within this void loop. So this void loop, I can only use this variable within this void loop. I can never use it anywhere else. That is why it is called local variables. So, but global variables are variables that are declared outside other functions. Usually it is on top of the beginning of the program. So let me show you what I mean. Look at this variable now. This is 2 variables that I declared. So let me use one of these now. This variable that I declare to store this piece of information. If you copy it, or will I say if I move it up here outside the setup and loop function, if I paste it here, this is what we call global variables. It is declared before other functions. So these variables now, I can use it within this void setup. I can use it within void loop. It will hold the value. It will hold the value of anything that I store in it, right? So this is the data type I use in storing the variable. This is the variable name. Then this is the value that I want it to store. For example, let me say I want to store a 0. The reason why I store this 0 is because this is the value that I'm storing in this variable. So instead of me to write 0, just like these votes here, instead of me to put 0 here to print this 0, I will call this by the name of the data that I store. So these votes here will represent this value. So instead of me to put 0 here, I call it by the name that I use in storing the data. So, but I can only use this variable. I can use this variable because it is a global variable. I can use it in setup function. I can use it in setup function. I can use it in global function. But assuming it is declared inside, just like this one now, just like this variable now, since it's declared inside this function, it can only be used within this function. It cannot be used elsewhere, only within the function. But global variable can use anywhere you wish to use it. Anywhere you wish to use it. So if you look at our screen, we have two methods of declaring a variable. So if you look at this screen, you will see the two methods of declaring the variable. First of all, you have to specify the data type, and which I'm going to discuss about. We are going to discuss about data type because data type and variable have things in common. You can't declare a variable without a data type. So every variable must have a data type. So the two methods of declaring this variable: first, you have to declare the data type. You have to initialize the data type. Then the variable name, the name you wish to use in storing the data. So once you put the name, so that whenever you want to use the data, whenever you want to use the value or the data stored in it, you call it by the name. And another one is initializing the value. So these are the two methods of declaring a variable. The first method is the data type and the variable name. Then the second method is data type, variable name, and initialization of the value that you want to store. That is the two methods of declaring a variable. Now let me show you how to declare a variable. So first of all, if you want to declare a variable, first of all you need a data type, then the variable name, and the value you want to store. So we'll discuss about data type, but let me use one of the data types so that you understand how to declare a variable. So first of all, we'll start with a global variable. So here, like I said, that a global variable is declared outside other functions. So, and normally it's used to be on top. So first of all, let me use a data type which is an integer, int. So int, then my variable name. Let me first of all use it. Let me use votes. So this is the variable name. Then I can end it with a semicolon. So this is first method of initializing a variable. You can see that I just named the data type and the variable name. I did not initialize what I want to store in the variable. Then I can come either in this void loop or void setup. Since this is a global variable, I can use it anywhere. So let me come to this void loop and say, since I've declared this variable, let me now initialize it. I will say votes equal to the information that I want to store in it. Let me say 0. Then end it with a semicolon. So what I did now is that I first of all put the data type and the variable name, but I did not put the information, the data that I want to store in this variable. then I now later come to any function that I want to use it, and I then initialize it. So whenever you see this vote, that means it's 0. So if I say serial.print, that means I want to print this 0 here. So instead of me putting 0 here, I will now replace it with this variable name. So this variable name stands for this 0. So this is the first method. Then the second method is that we can also declare and initialize it immediately. So for example, I will just initialize, after declaring the variable, I initialize it immediately. So I'll say equal to 0 semicolon. So if I want to use it now, if I want to use this variable, I'll just call it, because I have initialized the value that I want to store in it. So this is the second method. Either you put the data type and the name, then now later come to any place that you want to use it and initialize the value that you want to store in it, or you declare and initialize. So that is the two methods of declaring a variable.